Welcome, everyone. This is the sixth episode of our series on the tarot, The Fool's Journey, a descent into the tarot. And today we are going to start where we left off. So the first card, the first Major Arcana of the Rider-Waite that we're going to look at will be the Hanged Man. So with me, of course, as always, I have Silas Gauthier.
Hello there.
Hey Silas, all good?
Yeah, man. How's you?
All right as well.
Brilliant.
Okay, so starting now with the 12th Major Arcana, the Hanged Man. It's one of the most recognizable of all the Major Arcana, of all the tarot cards, perhaps. This and actually the next one, Death, is also very recognizable. And we see a man hanging upside down, doing a sort of figure four with his legs, hanging from his right leg on a cross, which isn't actually a cross, but a T. And this, of course, is significant, the fact that it's, let's say, a T-shaped structure and not a crucifix, as we see, for example, in Christianity. Now, it is in the supposed mythology of Celtic and Norse cultures that there would be a seasonal, or from time to time, their leaders would go through such an ordeal, so they would voluntarily hang themselves upside down, sort of mimicking what Odin or Wotan did to obtain the secrets of the runes, to obtain knowledge, to obtain wisdom. Of course, this is the mythology and what is written. We don't know if they actually went ahead and did it. I have my doubts. But it is a gesture that has a lot of significance to, these perhaps whatever culture created the tarot, for sure. And it is indeed associated with a self-sacrifice to obtain wisdom. Before I go into my intuitive thoughts on the Hanged Man, I would like you, Silas, to go ahead and say, well, first of all, if you were aware of that ritual, and also what your first symbolic notations are about this card.
Yes, Odin hanging upon Yggdrasil. I'm pretty sure the Celtic mythology has something similar. The name escapes me now, and the god escapes me, but ultimately it's this notion of martyrdom, and it's a sort of spiritual martyrdom. But the Hanged Man as well, the way that it's presented, at least in the Rider-Waite symbolism, shows, of course, as you mentioned, the Tau cross, the Tav cross, which is the end, the 22nd card. It also is a composite, metaphysically speaking. It's a composite of the horizontal line at the top, which is the abyss, and the primary branch, which goes down to, of course, you can imagine, or we can imagine here, from the card down to earth. So that is the nous. It's the primary branch, the intellect, which birthed the linearity of time, the linearity of the plane, and also of the vertical obstacle, that is the mind, because the mind is that which differentiates things. It's, again, if you're to put a vertical axis or a vertical surface in between a plane or in a plane, that is something that stops the freedom of movement upon that plane.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how the intellect or the nous functions. You'll notice as well that the Hanged Man is hanging from a cord from this abyss of heaven. Again, he's originally from heaven in this sense. He's just fallen from grace, if you will. But the cord itself is a sort of a piece of Latin symbolism, because the cord in Latin means heart. It is the word for heart. And this ties into what we were talking about with Harta beast in the last discussion. The Harta also means deer in Germanic languages, most notably that of Dutch. But the Harta is also where we derive our word for heart from. And of course this appeared within Leave the World Behind. And it appears within the Splendor Solace as well, the deer symbolism. So essentially he's hanging by the thread of his heart, the mooring rope as we saw in Sintra and the Convento de Cristo, the architecture there, all very symbolic of that. Again, the mooring rope is used on the boat. The boat is the symbolism of the ego, right, or another instantiation of the mind, symbolically speaking. But then we notice, so his
just to interject, if you remember, the rope in the Convent of Christ was depicted as curled around the pillar, sort of snake-like, and then there was also a belt. That of course, not being a rope, it's also symbolic of a strap that ties, right? But just to remind you of that.
Yes, absolutely. So it's that idea of the vortex, and you also saw you don't see it here on the Rider-Waite, but on that mooring rope in the Convento de Cristo, you had. So I mean, there was vertical spirals everywhere, toroids everywhere, right, for obvious reasons. But you had the rope, you had the threads of the rope, so the intertwining of that was something that appeared in, again, the deity escapes me, but I wrote about it, and it was either Leave the World Behind, the esoteric analysis, or the one that I'm doing now, which is an Empire of Corruption mythology revisited, where I discuss the Egyptians had this sort of tripartite rope that was used again in ritualism. It was a mother goddess figure, but she was associated with the sky and creation as well. So again, you have this same idea of the vertical spiral comprised of separate strands, usually 3 in number. I think in the Convento de Cristo it was 2 in number. So, but it's the same source of idea, same symbolism. Working our way down, you have the vines as well. You have the vines here. So the vines is a Bacchic symbol. It's a Dionysian symbol. Dionysus means either little Zeus or lame Zeus. I forget what Bacchus means etymologically now, but it's the same sort of idea. You have the notions of, or the connections rather, the comparative connections to Tammuz, Dumuzi, Christ himself, Krishna. These ideas of the sort of death and resurrection, right, or the ongoing essence or perturbation of time, rather, the process of time, and you even see, and I'm writing about it just recently there. By recently, I mean just I saved what I was working on there, and now we've tied in with this, and it's the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11, verse 32, the idea where Krishna provides his real form, or he intimates his real form, and he mentions, that he is time, the dissolver of worlds, that he will destroy all, he's here to destroy all people, but he will not destroy the Padavas. The Padavas are the 5 brothers. There's a story within the Dharmic tradition where the Padavas are the 5 brothers. They seek heaven, and one after the other, they all fall, bar Yudhishthira and his dog Svana, right, which is of course Orion, or the Fool, in Sirius. So, but interestingly, in that story, in the Bhagavad Gita, I believe it occurs in the Maharbhata as well, where it, I think it's Arjun, which is the sort of warrior king, and he is this sort of fiery emblem of the spirit, the sort of stubborn nature of life, and this inclination of self-preservation, even in the face of, of course, with life, certain death follows. So it's this resilience of life. That's what that is. But he looks at Krishna and he sees within Krishna's form the entire boundless expanse of the universe. And of course he cogitates upon that, and he asks Krishna, what are you to do with the dissolution of the world? Are you to dissolve us as well? And of course he says no. The reason he says no is because man is the star of stars. He is the five-pointed pentacle, if you will. Yudhishthira, of course, is all five of the brothers are emblematic of the five elements, but Yudhishthira is emblematic of the apex, the unifying principle of the spirit. You also see that within the Hanged Man. Though it looks like there's four, there is in fact five, because the halo behind him, again, like what you see of Yaldabaoth, there's three aspects to his head. There's the face of the lion, then behind that is this sort of, I believe it's a sort of circlet or something, not quite the halo, but it's a circlet of the crown. That is the nous, and then behind that is the halo, which animates all both the mind and the countenance of the lion, the face, the fiery energy of the body. It's the same idea you see here of the Hanged Man. So ultimately, he hangs from his right side of Chesed in Kabbalah, that which seeks to establish, right? He goes from Capricorn down to Cancer, or from, again, the top of his right foot down to Cancer, from Saturn to the Moon. Again, very emblematic of the Saturn-Moon matrix, this notion that appears within the New Age, I guess, of reincarnation, spiritual involution, this idea that man is a god within spiritual captivity, or he is at least part of God, a fragment of God that has descended to Earth. Again, a bit like a meteorite in that sense. So the idea is man must be maintained in this suspended, inverted state of the inverted world, right? To thus understand who he is, and then that is further exemplified by, you see the left foot, the way that it makes that sort of underhanded cross, which completes the figure of four. It's going from, again, in the direction of the foot, it's going from Tauros from the left-hand side to Antares in the east. And this is something that appears within the World Tarot card, as we were mentioning as well. It appears on the Wheel of Fortune too. Again, that's the sort of axis mundi of the world. It's similar to what you see with the pyramid, the base of four with the apex, which is the fifth, the conjoining point, the union of opposites.
Which the pyramid is incomplete, so it has that plane at the top. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Yes. So it's this notion as well that, well, firstly, materially, they've not quite finished their great work. But as well, it's this notion too that again, in an introspective and internal manner, if you were to complete the great work, you would be to end the iterative journey of the fool. Thus, you would literally attain the 0 point, and all existence would end at that point. So it's this notion that it can never truly be finished unless if one wants to end existence, right?
Well, it would end existence for that particular individual manifestation, and I think that is what occurs. I mean, at each let's say turn of the wheel, at each completion of these cycles, there is what I call a loss of fuel, in the sense that individual manifestations do obtain, let's call it metaphorically, obtain the answer that they came to seek, which is an individual answer. So one's answer is not necessarily equal to the other one's, right? So each individual has his own answer to seek. And when they obtain that answer. They stop manifestation into the scripted or veiled reality, right? So with that comes a loss of fuel for the scripted, because the scripted requires participation, not only in terms of energy but attention of the individual manifestations. It is nothing short of, if we think about our mental personalities, they are nothing short of puppets, or if you like a more current metaphor, they are like AI, right? And AI does not work without the input or the energy or the attention given by the external, in this case a human being, right? So in the same sense, the mental personality no longer manifests as a sort of, we could call it, placeholder kind of existence, and the manifestation of that individual part, if at all, if necessary, will always be directly from the essence. And I think that this is where the idea of divine avatars come from in Hinduism and other ideologies, which is the idea that that manifestation is not attached to the scripted world, but is its own. It carries its own individuality entirely, right? So it exists outside of any scripts, of any stories, of anything, and sees the world for what it is exactly, right? I don't know if I could advance now, or if you had anything more.
No, I can cover it later on, man. Please go ahead.
Okay, because I as you were talking, I took a few notes. Just not to forget. So one of the first notes was indeed something that you mentioned. It was the idea of the world of upside down, right? So to see the world correctly, you have to put yourself metaphorically upside down, in the sense of perhaps, this is a metaphor, of course, perhaps the things that you take as truths are in fact lies, right? And the things that you take as false may be proven to be closer to the truth, at least, right? So upside down in the sense of everything being reevaluated by an ego that went through several stages before and now goes through a period of actual sacrificial self-reflection. And I think that comes in sequence when we see the justice that we talked about in the previous episode. When we see the justice, and we talked about how the justice also represents a type of society, right? And that type of society contrasts with the emperor type of society, and even with the Hierophant type of society, and even, of course, with the chariot type of society, by making itself be perceived as more elevated, right? But we also discussed how that supposed and masked elevation eventually comes to be revealed as nothing more than a facade, right? And when that unveiling comes to pass, the being, let's say, has to go to another hermitage of sorts, like we saw in the Hermit, but this time going the next step and actually sacrificing its mobility, its means of power, everything, because he's got his hands tied behind his back. He's hanging upside down. This is not at all a comfortable position, and he goes through a reflection that is closer to or approaches him closer to an actual truth. If we, for example, look at the Hermit, In contrast with this, of course, the hermit is standing upside, so the correct side up, and he's looking at the illumination at inside the lantern, right, inside the lamp. Here, the illumination is directly on the head of the individual, right? So, when you talked about Arjuna, I remembered that Arjuna had 2 periods of exile, right? So one period of exile could be the hermit, which stemmed from the broken pact with the brothers that you mentioned, which of course is the previous types of being, of existing, of civilizing that didn't work. They weren't true. They eventually came down. They eventually were crumbled. And so that was the first period of reflection. Arjuna goes into a hermitage, looks onto himself. That's why I say it's the awakening of the ego. So that energy, that self-energy, goes into itself and analyzes, all right, this was false, so what do I need to do? Conclusion, I need to be more just, I need to be more elevated, etc. What follows? The justice card. So what you build after that is a civilization that tries to be more elevated, tries to be more cultural, tries to be more just, etc. Doesn't work, right? Next period of hermitage comes from, of course, in Arjuna's case, playing the dice and losing. So, Wheel of Fortune, right? The Wheel of Fortune determined that the dice were cast and the next civilization would fall as well. And he goes into the second exile, this time a more serious, uncomfortable exile, but one that produces far more wisdom than the first one, right? I think that is also an important aspect to point out, since you mentioned Arjuna, which wasn't actually on my mind before you did. It's also, I think, of significance, and I will let you talk about that, the fact that he's doing a figure 4 with the legs. And of course, if you invert the card, if you turn it upside down, it will be a figure 4. So it's the figure 4 is, of course, associated also with crucifixion and the material existence, and the let's say limitation that the soul has imposed upon itself. But over here, it's inverted, right? So it's like trying to liberate itself from those shackles of existence, right? And we all know very well what the next card is, so those shackles will take a bit more of death to let go of, no? But anyway, these were the first notes that I wanted to go through.
Well, something else to mention as well is that you did mention that this world is inverted, right? So even it has been said that our eyes view the world upside down to how we see it, inverted to how we see it. So this world itself is inverted. Our mind itself, for us, is perhaps spiritual beings within exile or a captivity, like the hanged man. Our minds have to provide us the illusion that there is some rigidity to it, again, like the branch of the tree, right? The vertical axis of it, the axis mundi. And it's the mind that is the axis mundi. It provides that rigidity of the illusion. Mm-hmm. Again, so it doctors the image and flips it upside down. And I remember talking to someone, and he mentioned this is all just imagination, it's not reality. And I mentioned to him that of course imagination comes from the Latin meaning image, and I said, well, your mind literally doctors, according to official science, it doctors the image of reality itself.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, reality you will never truly know of. The only reality you know of is the imagination of reality that your mind produces. So that you begin to you begin to sort of unpeel the layers of the concentric layers of illusion, the concentric wheels of fortune, if you will, and the flammarion, which it surrounds us, encompasses us, keeps us in this Orphic egg, this shell. But another thing to mention as well, that this idea of the child of the philosopher, or the child of the egg, is another way to describe it, is the hanged man, right? But it's not the hanged man at that state. The hanged man is still going through that awakening, but you quite rightly stated that the light has moved from the external of the lamp to the internal of the mind.
Yep.
So another way to look at this is that he has surrendered, or he has accepted the way that the world is. Of course, he's still bound. He's still in that uncomfortable position, but he's consciously awake. He no longer feels the pain, if you will, of the world. He understands the reason for the world, the reason for it all, for the sanguine nature of it.
Yeah.
And it's almost akin to this notion that he has unlocked his unconscious, or he is viewing the world from the unconscious or the unmanifested aspect of himself, the spiritual aspect, rather than interfacing with the world from a purely a purely materialistic or mental or carnal aspect. So he's took on a more supernal quality. He understands the noumenal elements of the world as opposed to just the phenomenal elements. Another thing to mention is that regarding the Padavas, I believe it actually means in Sanskrit the descendants of Padu, I think the name is, or Pandu. And that is a king. It's a king of the Kuru kingdom, which is a mythological kingdom in the Dharmic tradition. And Pandu or Padu, I forget the name now, literally means yellowish white. So it's this idea you see crop up in alchemy about, 2,500 years later, or whatever it may be, with magnesia. Now, magnesia is this brilliant white substance, right, in terms of the alchemical understanding of it and the alchemical semiotics attached to it. And it's sort of this, it's symbolic of this idea of Mercurius, which is the subtle force that pervades and permeates all things, that we are all permutations, radial permutations of. And it is that which it transforms all things. It is the source of gleaming, glistening, yet at the same time opaque force, and formless form, the 0 point of all things, that produces both the one and then the two, and in all iterations of numbers and forms and what have you. It's what drives things forward.
And just a quick interjection there. I think it's important as well to note that, as far as I remember, magnesium reacts with oxygen. So it means that when it's exposed, it blows up. It's like it has an explosive reaction, right? So I think that is significant as well in alchemical terms.
And this takes us to the actual mythology of Pandu or Padu, which is that he died or he endured a self-sacrifice to thus renew the land. So ultimately his 5 sons were simply all aspects, transformative and alchemical aspects of the various transmutable forms of this magnesia, of the 0 point, of the pure potential of all things. It's akin to magnesia itself, like the philosopher's stone, which both are ultimately synonymous. it's this notion of, one way to visualize it would be the sort of perfect peace and equanimous stillness that is within the center of a storm, the eye of a storm. That the tempest, ruffles the earth and all other things around it. There's this violent chaos that emanates out from it, but the point of emanation itself is not chaotic. This is again, it's of a 0 point, it's of a zero order of being. So that's somewhat what the Hanged Man is tapping into with the halo and the solar symbology behind his head, and also the sacrifice that he's going through. By the way, another thing to mention is that this is, in terms of comparative mythology, this appears absolutely everywhere in terms of, so you mentioned Odin hanging from Yggdrasil. He also gives up, I believe, his left eye. There's symbolism to do surrounding that as well.
That was with Mimir, yeah. He gave up one of his eyes to drink from the pool of knowledge, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And then you have Christ's crucifixion, of course. Prometheus as well. I believe he hung upon, oh God, I forget the mountain now.
The mountain, yeah, and his liver was continuously being eaten by the vulture, yeah.
Yes, which interestingly is the liver itself is to do with it's related to Saturn, or the satyr, as we see with the Etruscan. I forget what the stone's called now, but there's an archaeological stone that was involved in haruspicy, and it's the first mention of Satyr or Saturn in sort of Italic lore. And again, it was used with haruspicy, which is you take the entrails, usually the livers, of animals or sacrificial victims, and you try and discern or extract meaning from it. So the liver was very much involved with this notion of time. I think it perhaps has something to do with the liver being an organ which is involved in waste processing and things such as that. Again, time is almost the processing of waste. Time itself is almost the liver of the cosmos.
Well, I would say that the liver acts as the filter, right? And it's also what, when the liver is out of balance, it changes your decisions, your temper for your decisions. So I think that it has been associated with the ego as well, right? So it would be, because of course, the ego being the filter and the decision center, in this particular case, voluntarily, because the figure is not struggling. He seems to be there voluntarily. He seems to be there willingly, obtaining his vision, his wisdom, and he, instead of, and in contrast with the hermit again, where he is at the top of that plane, of that pyramid, of that mountain, where it's cold. He is now, seeing the upside down. So it's the same as saying that the ego observed what was above and what was external as well, and now observes what is in the subconscious and what is below and what is internal, right? And so the upside down, I think, symbolizes that as well, because if in the hermit card he was at the top of the pyramid, standing upright, in this card it's like he is hanging from the pyramid, upside down, and therefore looking inward and looking at the subconscious elements, which of course I consider to be the actual conscious, but that's a different matter. But he's looking at the internal chaos and trying to discern from there what is actual individuality from what isn't, right? And this will produce results, but not without a price. And that price will be, of course, the eventual death of the mental character that has to give way to a new form, a new being that is more in line with the actual individual essence, I would say. So I would like to point that out as well.
Another thing to mention with the Hanged Man is that this notion of the four. So again, as I mentioned, you on his left leg, you go from well, Tauros, which typically should be east because it's all inverted, but it's from east to west. You go from east to west. It's the same thing that occurs within the Masonic greeting. I'm a traveller, travelling to the east, no, to the west, seeking that which was lost.
Yeah.
Where do you hail from? I hail from the east. So it's this idea that I hail from the divine realms. I'm voluntarily, or I've been tricked into it, depends on what tradition you look at, into travelling to the west, into the land of the dead, into, again, the sort of Hadean realms, the underworld, the actual unconscious place, which is a sort of narrow reality. And I seek to understand where I have come from, my home, from this foreign land. So it's the same. It's the same idea you see absolutely everywhere. There was a Nigerian god as well. I'm pretty sure it was called Ifa. It was very similar to this idea of Odin hanging from Yggdrasil as well. Mm-hmm. But I mean, there's literally cross-cultural everywhere this occurs. Yeah, another thing to mention with the four is that it's the two and the two. So the two and the two creates the heart. Again, if you reverse them and put them side by side, you see the same thing with the three and the three. Again, that establishes the eight, or the butterfly, birth and death, resurrection, the duality, and the middle point, which connects the two through the hieros, gamos. So again, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. That's also, by the way, what's behind Cicada 3301. Even the idea of 3301, which is a prime, I think it's the 438th prime entirely, and it's the 33rd prime between 3000 and 6000, if I recall correctly. So it's this same instantiation of the eight, and of course the cicada itself is very much like a butterfly. It's evolved with this eight. The King of Swords is associated with that, the Keter, and of course the first of the four messiahs within both Kabbalistic and, I believe, Old Testament lore. The two as well, you can conjoin even further from the heart, and it joins, of course, into the Piscean fish, right? This is the Christian sign. That fish is basically, in alchemy, it is the symbol of Mercurius. And you can see that upon the alchemical hand, or the hand of the alchemist. And I believe it's in one of my books. It might have been in Leave the World Behind, or the one that I'm doing. No, I think it was in Leave the World Behind. I did a total breakdown of the hand of the alchemist and what it all means. And in essence, it's the same notion that we see with the likes of Padu and the Padavas, right? So you have the six in number. And of course, as well, the sixth one is Pandu or Padu. It is the Mercurius, it's the fish, it's the symbol of, again, like what I mentioned, the pure potential, undifferentiated and unmanifested, the subtle force, and that feeling of the inner certainty that we're constantly attempting to tap into, even with these discussions or whatever we may be doing. Another instance is the seven. So this is why the seven is also a symbol of the demiurge, because if you reverse the sevens and put them together, it creates the triangle, right? And again, that's involved with the Trinity, and it's also involved as well with a symbol, a universal symbol for generation. Again, the sort of prism which narrows, or rather refracts the white light into the brilliance of colour, the brilliance and the diversity of the world in all of its various forms. It provides that illusion individuality, right? Or you could say in divided duality, that idea. So it's all tied up with that, with the four. And the four elements, of course, that goes without saying, but yeah.
Have you noticed, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but it just occurred to me, that if you look at the cards as it is depicted, right, you see that it follows the motion of the cross blessing. You know what Christians do, like Father, Son, Holy Ghost, right? So it starts at the top, goes to the chest, so the bottom of the picture, and then it goes to the left and then to the right.
Yeah. It's so it'd be sat. Actually, I'll get the zodiac wheel because. So it basically
you
follows.
Understand what I mean, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's well, it's involved with the circle as well, because you can, if you look at, and I'll try and get the GIF because I just literally viewed it and it was something that Reagan posted. But if you view the, I'll get the GIF, but I'll talk about this thing on the zodiac. So yeah, you go from Capricorn to Cancer to Aries and then to Libra. So that's the symbol of, Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, right? But the Father, Saturn, Capricorn, or Aquarius, down to Cancer, the Son, which is the sort of the point of limitation, the gestation, the Son of Man, in Cancer, the Moon, and then to Aries, and then to Libra. So that idea of the vernal and the autumnal equinox, but you'll notice it. The vertical is the solstices in that instance, but the horizon point, Aries and Libra, is the equinox, literally from Latin, the equal nights. I think it's called as such because at those 2 points of the vernal and autumnal equinox, both the night and the day are of equal measure. I think it's something to do with that. Or so it was wherever that word was developed. So again, you have one which is of soul, or the day, and one that is of the night, right? It's of the kinoma. So one that is of the pleroma, so going from the pleroma down to earth, and then one that is of the sort of the canvas, the dark canvas of the abyss, right? So it's, again, that's not by accident. That's certainly not by accident. And even it cropping up in the Catholic thing, I can imagine that probably stems from something that's even far more ancient. But again, it has the same idea that it would in its esoteric sense, even in Catholicism. Obviously, the laity have a different idea of what that is. But yeah, it's that yeah, jump in, man.
No, I was going to say that the crucifixion, whether it's done one way or the other, is a story that is prevalent, and in my opinion, originally, what it depicts is I think it's already a sort of skewing of an original story, and I will explain, for example, in the Christian sense. So if Christ is the ego, right? We're talking about psychology in the most essential way. If Christ is the ego, because Christ is the messenger, let's say, he is the one that does for the Father, right? And the Father is the essence. The Father is not here. He is the generator of reality, of the, let's say, the existence, but he is not here. But Jesus is. And so Christ is the ego, the representative, in constant connection with the essence, with the Father. And below him are the mental personalities, right? Which can be seen as the apostles, right? So the apostles gather around the ego, and these are, as well depicted, flawed personalities that have their own issues. They even reject the ego at a certain point, and they have all these things. But once they accept the connection, they become sort of messengers of representatives at the frontier of the psyche of that ego, right? Now, what I think that it's the skewing of a story is because I don't think that originally in that Christian depiction, the crucifixion was there. I think that the sacrificial crucifixion of the ego is exactly another attempt to, remove presence, and I'm not saying power per se, but remove presence of the ego in the collective psyche. And that is done by, or one of the effects is that it collectivizes the psyche, right? The psyche becomes cultish, becomes dependent upon the opinion of the collective, or the tides that the collective go through, and so on and so forth. And that idea of the ego, because you never see in the depiction Jesus or Christ doing what the collective thinks is right? He is performing his individuality as a representative, direct representative of the Father, therefore the essence, right? So he's not following the Pharisees or what culturally is acceptable or not. He is actually, like he said, he's setting the world on fire, right, with his individuality. And he is affecting it through the mental personalities, which are the apostles. And so the crucifixion part, to me, it should not, in my opinion, belong, or does not belong, in the original Christian sense. And I know that what I'm saying is completely controversial, but I don't care. And I think that the ending of that story was not a sacrifice of the ego to prevent the mental personalities from having to face death. And when I say death, here is in the psychological sense, okay? Because if we view the story of the gospel from a psychological point of view, we understand that, when death is mentioned, it is not a physical death. It is the death of the mental personality, the death of that, personality that is made up of habits, made up of culture, made up of, beliefs, what I would call then false memories, etc. And that has to die in the metaphorical psychological sense, so that a mental personality that is in contact with the ego, and therefore indirectly in contact with the essence or the Father, takes its place. So I just think that, honestly, the crucifixion as an act of, death of the ego is incorrectly placed there. Because what should have happened was the elevation of Christ as the ego to the throne of the psyche, and not a death to save mental personalities from death, or therefore from change. You understand? So I think we should, although the crucifixion was applied to the Christian story, I think we should separate, in my opinion, we should separate crucifixion in the journey that we're seeing here in the tarot and the crucifixion that we see in Christianity, even though it was written in and put there on purpose, in my opinion.
Another thing to mention regarding, I just got the gift there as well.
Oh.
Yeah, well, this ties in with what you just mentioned regarding the crucifixion. this idea of the sine and the cosine. So that's what I was mentioning with the circle. So all of this basically ties into one another. And so basically the difference between sine and cosine are the way that they intertwine, and the way that they intertwine with what we were just mentioning regarding, the sign of the cross, as you quite rightly mentioned. Again, from Saturn to Cancer to Aries to Libra, is the sine of theta equals the height, or the vertical component, divided by h. And the cosine of theta equals the adjacent side horizontal component divided by h. So, of course, the cosine is basically the horizontal component from Aries to that of, from Saturn to that of Cancer. And the sine is that of Aries to that of Libra. So you have this sort of division of the solstices and the equinoxes. Of course, in the actual sense of the Hanged Man, that is all flipped round. Because as the sun would travel horizontally to us, we understand when we take on the archetype of the Hanged Man that the sun is actually, again in a very metaphorical sense, the sun is actually the sort of cosmic pillar that connects us to the higher realms from whence we came. So again, like what you're mentioning, it's a death of the mental character. In that sense, you literally turn the world upside down, not literally, but in a figurative sense. There's also something to mention with sine and cosine, and obviously the tangential as well, which is that they're all involved with pi, the letter, and of course the number of pi. Pi pictographically looks like, of course, two T's put together, right? Two tabs put together. So it's the same sort of notion. You could say it's the end and the end, which cancels one another out and maintains the homeostatic nature of it, of the circle and the.
And it's very similar to the symbol of Gemini as well, right? So.
Absolutely, and that appears within the Padavas as well. I believe the two twin brothers, Nucla and I forget the other one's name, but that very similar to the Lovers as well. That tarot card. So you see it with that. Another thing to mention is with the sigil of Saturn and the number 4. Again, if you take the Hanged Man and you flip it round on its reverse, again similar to pi, right? You take two T's and put them against one another, or the two 2s, two 3s, two 7s, and they form the basis of some form of geometry inherent to Euclidean geometry, is a sort of prototypical form. You get somewhat, I say somewhat, the beginnings of the sigil of Saturn. Now, the way you actually get the sigils, because you have two sort of protruding axes that you don't actually quite get with the two 4s placed side by side, again in a sort of reversed format. The only way to get that is if you create an A. So if you extend out both lines, of the top and of the sort of northeast of that figure of 4, and of course that gives you the A, but it also gives you the Aleph, and the Aleph in its very prototypical form, which is the horns of the bull, which is another symbol of the sun. It's a symbol of Utu, Shamash, that idea, a symbol of Saturn as well, because Saturn was very much synonymous with the sun in Mesopotamian and Levantine mythology. So again, there's that connection with Saturn too, a connection to almost the primordial creation of the world itself from the mind, from the aspect of the mind, from the divisive nature of the mind. You could even look at the theogony that you see with, you could say, comparatively, every single religion, but let's just take the Greco-Roman folk religion, for example. You see with Uranus being mutilated by Saturn, that is the mind sort of mutilating or narrowing or devaluing, debasing the spirit. And then he himself is paranoid that the same thing will happen to him by Jupiter, the body, right? That the body will overpower the mind. And of course, eventually it does.
Sorry, just a quick interjection. Note that the mutilation was a castration, therefore removing the power to create, right? So this is important, an important aspect to point out.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So it's the same thing you see, for example, with our social organisms of humanity. Civilization, it eventually becomes more and more materialistic, even if it begins in a sort of pioneering or outburst phase where it's very spiritual. It might be driven by religion, and then it goes into a sort of high point of academia, intellectualism. That is what ends up, the intellectualism destroys the civilization, and it moves into a purely materialistic.
That's
idea.
the justice phase. Right.
Exactly.
When we were talking about the justice in the previous episode, that is exactly the point that you are describing. So this supposed elevation, this supposed spirituality that is but a facade. It's not an actual thing, right? And eventually that veil has to fall. Eventually, revelation, let's say, of what is false, of what was actually a mask and not a real thing, occurs. And at that point comes the hanged man, which is the sacrificial, voluntary self-reflection of the mental personality in the place of the ego. So the commanded, let's say, driven by the ego. The ego has the willpower to impose its authority. And this is something that I have to emphasize. The authority of saying, even though, and this is something that of course we in society we have trouble seeing, even though this is uncomfortable, it has to be done, right? And this is something essentially spiritual, right? You cannot remove any falsehood. You cannot remove any, false beliefs, false memories, etc., without going through the uncomfortable reevaluation. It is not a comfortable thing. The ego has to motivate the mental personality to face its own death. And it's the mental personality, like I was saying before, that is supposed to, quote unquote, die. It's not an actual death, and not the ego. The ego never dies. That is why, of course, in the story they have also put that the ego then resurrects. So Christ resurrects. It doesn't resurrect. It never died, right? It wasn't the ego that was supposed to go through that process. It was the mental personality, right? That gets connected to the ego and gets connected to the essence, and then is supposed to allow itself to die.
Well, it's the same. It's the same idea that you see with Krishna when he mentions to Arjun that, or Arjuna, pardon, that he is time, the dissolver of worlds. He's here to kill all people, but he will not kill the Pandavas. Why? Because the Pandavas, again, that is the pentacle, the star. It is the Star of Bethlehem, if you will. It is the blueprint, the prototypical blueprint of all mankind, of all life, of all sentience, of the literal manifestation of the unstable element that is Mercurius.
Yeah, the archetypes.
The archetypes, absolutely. Yeah. So it's like what you're saying. All people could die on the boat of the ego, right? Upon the Eridanus, the cosmic Eridanus. But the boat will not cease, right? It will just await new passengers, because the boat is that which is eternal, because the meanderings of the Eridanus are eternal, and it will follow the current of the Eridanus, irrespective of the helmsman or the passengers. And of course, this is the sort of idea of Arjuna. You see with that, the sort of fiery essence of the ego, that it makes one believe that they are an individual. It makes one believe that they are in control of their life. But in fact, perhaps they're upon the ship of fate. That the ego is pulling them along, and there's multiple aspects to that. It's a complexity, a labyrinth of these pulling and pushing archetypal forces. Again, like the oscillations of time, and of course that can be projected in terms of the circle as well. Yeah. Another thing to mention as well is that the blue and the red. By the way, before I get to that, so we were talking about the bull, right? Uh-huh. This is another instance that I just came across there. So you have this idea of the tree, right? So we were talking about Prometheus. Well, before I get onto the tree, Prometheus, Quetzalcoatl, he undergoes a self-immolation in Aztec mythology, the feathered serpent. So he sacrifices himself, similar to what we've been talking. Again, a mirroring of all of this. Mithras as well. And again, in the Mithraic mysteries, the god Mithras sacrifices a bull, a symbol of primal power and fertility, and a symbol of the sun, a symbol of Saturn. So again, to reach the promised land, if you will, the Elysian fields, the greater beyond of the beyond, from whence we actually stem from, originate from, to become a son of God, if you will, we have to face Saturn, face that planet which is on the outer rim of the solar system, the system of our soul, and we have to face it, we have to defeat it, we have to transcend it. Again, like the psychopomp or the Anubis character, we are weighed. That's why, of course, Libra ends up, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. So it goes from Saturn, Cancer, Aries, and then Libra. Libra is the end because judgment is the end. The fall
Mars, Venus. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So the judgment is the end. And again, you have to have that equilibrium of the feather to the heart, right? The feather of Ma'at, of truth, to one's heart and one's deeds. The two and the two put together, as we've mentioned, the Mercurius. So your very being, your very 0 point of being must be untainted, must be understood for you to thus pass. This appears, by the way, in the iPet Goat 2. There's hearts everywhere. This is the reason for it. It's Mercurius. It's the fish. So, again, it's the same thing within Mithras. Yeah. Mithras literally overcomes that. And you also notice with the Mithraic Leontocephaline or Leontiades, the lion-headed hierophant, that he is again entwined with a serpent, a vortical serpent, like what we see on the World Tarot card, right? The feminine has that velveteen, that serpentine velvet fabric that encompasses her, and again a toroidal or vortical manner. Right. So on to the tree. So you'll notice with Buddha's enlightenment was under the Bodha tree, again where Buddha, the term, comes from. And he gained bodhisattva, or enlightenment, under this Bodha tree. So he was seeking truth. He underwent rather, the sort of, not the direct sacrifice, but a renunciation of worldly life, similar to what we see with the Hanged Man, with the symbolism there.
Death of the mental personality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, he faced Mara. He faced all of that. Again, like Arjuna facing Krishna, right? Krishna, Christ. And by the way, there's more overlap between Krishna and Christ. There's a lot of the various stories of Krishna that are almost verbatim that of Christ. One comes to mind, for example, when Christ is anointed with oil by the woman. Krishna is also anointed with oil by a woman, I do believe. And it's very similar. And by similar, I mean almost verbatim. in the way that it goes. So again, you have these overlaps that are just very, very convenient and peculiar, should we say. Yeah. But anyway, Krishna is, Arjuna views Krishna and sees the entirety of the world in it. He understands, obviously, time. He understands this principle of judgment, this principle, the actual processes of existence itself. So again, it's similar to what you see with the tree, Yggdrasil, the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree.
Bodhi tree.
It's a Bodhi tree. Sorry, it's almost like they become an extension of that which is has a greater lifespan than them, that knows more than them, that is a symbol of knowledge, that is a monolith, which is something you see through.
And whose symbolic nature is, of course, Druidic. And one day I really have to, talk about the influence and the clear nature of the Druidic scripting of the false, the false reality, let's say. I would just like to say, if I can, another correlation, just going a bit backwards. I didn't want to interrupt your flow there, but when you mentioned the Eridanas, remember that the father of Krishna was Vasudeva, right? And Vasudeva was, dwelling by the river, Yamuna, or I don't remember the name. And he carries a newborn Krishna across the river, right? So that's the symbology. Again, of course, you see that symbology in that beautiful, beautiful depiction in the Siddhartha book by Hermann Hesse, where Vasudeva is the name of the ferryman that carries people over across the river, and who Siddhartha, being here a representation of Krishna as well, becomes friends with and lives with for a period of time, until he realizes that the river held the answers all along for what he was seeking, right? It was just by observing the river itself he would attain enlightenment, he would attain the wisdom that he was looking for. So Vasudeva, as the ferryman, as the river crosser, let's say, is also a very important figure to point out here, since you mentioned Eridanas. Sorry, but I just had, wrote the note as you were talking about.
It's also, as well, you are right, it's the Yamuna River, and Yamuna, of course, was the twin of Yama. So Yama is the gatekeeper of, you could say the janitor. From the Latin doorkeeper, which links with Janus, of the wheel of samsara. So yeah, absolutely, it's all interconnected in that aspect. Another thing we could mention, the blue and the red. So this blue and red is symbolic of, again, the heros gamos, of not the white and the red, not of the anima and the animus, which is more akin to the sort of unconscious aspects of the psyche and that idea. This is more a connection between the left and the right hemisphere of both water and fire. So it's, again, the left and the right hemisphere are almost contrasting ideas and notions, and you see with the Hanged Man as well, it's constructed in such a manner that you see the two dualistic quadrants, two dualistic compartments rather, of the left and the right, and again you have that horizontal point connecting the two. So it's almost like the Hanged Man takes on this quality of the thalamus, and that the part of his, golden head, including the golden hair that he has, almost like that of fire, that could be symbolic of the pineal gland. And everything behind that is akin to the thalamus, right? The inner chamber, that which connects the two. It's the bridge between the two of the left and the right hemisphere.
Yeah, well, you also note that if you look again and you look back at the Wheel of Fortune, you see that there's a red devil at the bottom and a blue sphinx in the exact same hue at the top. So at that time we discussed how the lower devil was the lower impulses and so on, and how the blue sphinx was a sort of reawakened ego, the sense of authority. He's holding the sword, he's holding the power, etc. So it's the same here. He is wearing already the devil, and so the lower devil and the upper sphinx, the upper ego. But it's not enough. He had to go through this process of, we could call it self-sacrifice. It's in essence a self-sacrifice to obtain the wisdom that was missing, right? Because what was discovered in the Wheel of Fortune was still not enough to reach truth. It still built a false and flawed version of the world, even though we could consider at its face a more elevated version, but nonetheless a false version, right? But here I interpret, when you were talking about the blue and red, I interpret that because it's the exact same hue that is seen in the Wheel of Fortune, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So it's the same idea that we see with the Capricorn and the right. Cancer, or Saturn and the Moon. And you're quite right. I mean, the Wheel of Fortune, there's still that divide between them, and it's like what you're seeing within this card of the Hanged Man is that, again, he's connected, and of course, you quite rightly state as well, the red is the upper, right? It's the legs of the devil that we mentioned was actually, interestingly, switched around, of course, with the Wheel of Fortune, right? So the blue was on top and of the chimeric sphinx, and the Piscean legs were at the bottom, but now it's inverted. So it's interesting because Saturn is associated with blue, typically, and red is associated with the moon. But again, it can change sometimes. Of course, the blue is sometimes, or a lot of the times, associated with the moon as well. But whenever you see blue and red together, that's typically what it symbolizes, this idea of Saturn and the moon combined.
Do you mean the United States?
Yes. Well, it's another thing as well. You see Saturn, this blue and red, appear within the crowns of Egypt. And of course you have the white crown as well, which is more commonly associated with the red. But the blue was the crown of war. So again, this notion of Saturn being a devourer of time, that time devours all man and all things, that it would be very much associated with war in that sense.
Yeah.
And the Latin idea as well, their unique two-faced god of Janus, again a god of time as well, because of the two faces, the thresholds of
past and future. Yeah.
Past and future, absolutely. But when they were engaged in war, they would have open during times of peace. They would close the Janus gates, right? But in times of war, they would open it, and they would only close it again when peace resumed. So it's this idea that during war, that is when the currents of time were flowing. So thus, Janus was awakened. And then during times of peace, that's when the currents were not flowing, or they were still, they were stagnant. And thus, you had that sort of limitation of Janus going back into his slumber. So that's all associated with this blue and red. Another thing we could mention, oh yes, right, so the left and right hemisphere, the pineal gland and the Hanged Man being the sort of bridge point between the two, with the thalamus as well. So the left hemisphere usually is associated with language and logic. It's associated with linearity, sequential understanding. It's also associated with the verbal and the symbolic too. So things that are very, mathematical, they're extremely, you can break them down, subdivide them into various sequential or segmented parts. And of course, the right hemisphere is associated with emotion, it's associated with the holistic, even the creative as well, that of the spatial and visual. You also notice, by the way, see if the Hanged Man, the back of it is grey, which is something somewhat unique to the rest of the backgrounds of the cards. Yeah. And the reason for that is because the grey is the connection between the Boaz and Yakin. It's the Hieros Gamos, the coincidentia oppositorum between the black and the white, which produces the grey. So,
but I'm sorry, just to interject. It's the not exactly the same hue, but it's similar in that sense to the Hermit, because the background of the Hermit is also grey, and that's why these two cards, I think, are intrinsically connected. One is upright, looking at the external, and the other one is upside down, looking at the internal. But sorry, just to interject there.
Absolutely, yeah. You could mention as well that even the way that he's, he has his hands behind his back bound, but he almost looks like an eagle in some ways. I mean, of course, that could link to Scorpio and this idea of the mark of death. Scorpio was also associated with the eagle or Aquila. Yep. And I mean, in that sense, it's almost that he's in his predator. Again, like the eagle will swoop down in a very predatory manner, again, to increase its velocity when it's after its prey, and it will grab it in its talons. But it's a symbol of, it's a mark of death, essentially. It's a symbol of death. When you see it in terms of Aldebaran and Tauros, which is a symbol, again, of the sun, of life, of existential life. And then you have Antares, which is a symbol of the unconscious, the unmanifest, the sort of the primeval processual force that's behind all of life. Yeah. That would be associated with this, right? It would be associated with this notion of involution again that we've already talked about.
Well, we can. I'm sorry. I was
going to mention really quickly as well. So it's the 12th card. So that appears that's associated with the zodiac. Of course, it's associated with the 6 and the 26. So 2 times 6, which is of course the number of the tetragrammaton, the value of the tetragrammaton in Hebrew. The 6 is associated with the hexagram, which is the connecting of the 3 and the 3. Again, like the infinite of the 8, it's the connection of the left and the right, of the male and the female, this notion. And the 2 and the 1 and the 2. So even the 12 itself, the way it's constructed, it starts with the monad, and then it sort of goes into this involuted essence of the craftsman, the demiurge. So it's the same idea as Uranos, which is mutilated by that of Saturn. You see it with Yama, which means twin. You quite rightly mentioned Yamuna, of who the river is theophorically named after. That's all associated with that. So Yama is that is the 2 prongs of the Y, if you will, right? Yeah. It's that which maintains the duality and thus the processual nature of existence.
Yeah, I was going to say that if we look at the scripted world in current times, we see that we are in the Hanged Man phase, because we are seeing everything upside down for a reason. The idea, of course, is to steer us in a false direction, but the idea is also to replace what would otherwise be an organic process, right? And we are seeing the world upside down, where Men are no longer men, women are no longer women. I don't want to go too much into that, otherwise the video will be taken down for whatever. But we are seeing things that were once considered solid now being malleable, and things that were considered malleable now being made solid, and so on and so forth. So it's as if we as observers, those who pay attention, those who are seeking, are being shown the upside down of the script, of the scripted world, right? And we already know, that's why we already know what follows. Death follows. Death in the sense, again, not a material death, but a death of the previous notions, right? Of the previous ideas. For example, we also witnessed, even in our lifetimes, the period of the justice, right? Where we would look upon the world and think it was, the best manifestation of society that there could be, right? Through words like democracy and freedom and, that sort of thing. These words were associated with the facade, just like we saw in the Justice card, right? Now, it transitioned into the Hanged Man. The facade slowly was eroded, slowly fell, and it had to fall. Again, I am not saying that it was to be remained or to be maintained, but what was supposed to be an organic process, a process that would happen by itself, influenced by awakened egos, by the essential self, is being scripted exactly to avoid the reawakening, exactly to steer you back into a new segment of the script. So the death that follows will also be a scripted death. It will not be a real, actual death of what was unnecessary and what was deemed as, already, putrefact and needed to be cast out for the new, for the renewal to emerge. It will be just another story sold, right? But we will see the death phase in the world, I think. I don't know if you agree with this, and if you want to move now to the death, or if you have anything to
I have some things to say upon that. I mean, this is the reason they absolutely are preempting, and they're trying to, again, invert. And by invert, we're talking about their sort of this turning around their again, trying to eschew the awakening that would occur at the end of these cycles. And by the way, the Tav cross as well being one aspect of the sort of the cross, right, which itself is the notion of the sort of cosmic world ages, right? And you see that within the idea of Polaris and the Suastika, which means in Sanskrit good being. So it's this notion of the processual nature of all things that you see with the Little Dipper and the Big Dipper, and we touched upon all of that with our breakdown and our analysis of the Joker Folie à Deux. But so what you're seeing with that Tav is basically one quadrant of the four world ages. So in that sense, what it could be inferring is that the Hanged Man, like ourselves, he who sees beyond the topsy-turvy clown world of the circus, understands what this world is actually about, sees into Krishna's form and sees the expanse of, the endless expanse of the universe. That those individuals, they're trying to ensure not a lot of them are born, or not a lot of them are established or ignited by the mutability at the end of this age. I mean, this is why the Vatican has on... they have a telescope on Mount Graham, which just so happens to be exactly 3,300 meters high, give or take. They have a telescope called Lucifer, or Lucifer.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. Yeah.
So I mean, this is why they look at the sort of pinpricks of the plasmid pinpricks that are peering through the abyss of the Konoma, from, you know, lighting the way and showing us what actually is beyond this veil of the Konoma, which is, you know, in the pleroma. Perhaps that is what we're seeing, right, with the stars in the night sky. Mm-hmm. Be it either, you know, directly or metaphorically. So it's almost like they're attempting to understand where we are in the cycles, and where we're going, and how they can preempt it and maintain control over the soul trap. Again, the priest class, like what we've always mentioned, they are a philosopher class. They're the philosopher kings, as Plato mentioned, and they ultimately are born out of stargazers, and they understand existence from that standpoint of the sort of cyclical understanding of it.
Well, you see them depicted, for example, in Tolkien as the 9 kings that became wraiths, right? So they became wraiths because they accepted the rings, the gifts of the rings of power, and thus turned them into slaves of Sauron and so on. Of course, it's several depictions of these, and of course, I prefer, you know me, but I prefer the depiction of embodiment of shadows. But it doesn't matter. It's just depictions to present the same. We all need to present them in metaphors anyway, because it's not a literal, palpable thing that we can, present in a literal manner. So we need these depictions anyway to describe that. I don't know if you have anything to add as
one last thing, just a passing comment.
Right.
The sort of the verticality of the Hanged Man. Mm-hmm. You can see it within the Star tarot card, and this ties in with the 4. So you have the 8, which is, of course, depicting, amongst other things, the 8 phases of the moon, from a full moon to new moon, and of course the various quarters and waxing periods. But between each of the vertical points is, of course, 4. You have to count 4. So, for example, from a new moon to full moon, which would be the vertical axis, you have to go new moon, waning crescent, last quarter, and waning gibbous, to then get to the full moon. So you have to go 4 to then get to the verticality of the new thing. So yeah, just that's just a random sort of arbitrary point, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very well. So after this period of crucifixion, we can call it whatever, comes death. And now this card, of course, is usually, a very seen as a very scary card, because death has this connotation, this negative connotation, when death is a part of life, and we see it in nature that without death there is no life. Without the death of the old, there is no life for the new. And the depiction that we see here is of basically a civilization dying, right? A civilization of well-dressed people, and you see, of course, a religious figure like a pope. There you see other people on their knees. One is already dead, the king. Seems to be the king, at least. The crown is on the ground already. All sort of begging this skeletal rider that comes in to basically remove that which is false. And it's really a card that comes, if in an organic sense, it is absolutely an essential stage because it removes the facade of existence for that particular stage. And of course, remember, this is death, but you do see at the in the background of the card, you do see the sun peering through, like in between the two towers. Incredibly symbolic, of course, but in between the two towers, there in the background of civilization, you see the sun waiting for death to do its thing, so that it may shine again, right, and renew it all. And of course, the card that follows is Temperance. We'll get to that in probably the next episode. But these are my first thoughts on death. What are yours, Silas?
Well, in terms of the Death Tarot card, of course, it's extremely important. So the first thing we'll mention, because we actually touched upon it, funnily enough, you'll notice the little boat, the solitary boat in the back, right? Again, it's this idea of the ego, that the ego will always remain, sort of upon this the river of the Eridanus, if you will. You'll notice as well in the foreground, so there's a greyness to the back, which actually, funnily enough, is the same sort of grey hue that appears upon the Hanged Man, so isn't that unique? Again, it's this notion that pardon me, there's this notion of the connection, the Heros Gamos, that death is both renewing, it's elucidating, but it's also very destructive. So yeah, one thing to mention is he's wearing, in the foreground, so between the two pillars, you have Boaz and Yakin, but you have the sun, which is just going through its rebirth point. So on plate 19 of the Splendor Solace, that's the Negredo. The Negredo is the sun just peering above, the hope of the sun after the dreadfulness of the night. That's what you see. You see the same thing here. By the way, you see the same thing, I believe, in the Moon Tarot card, or maybe the sun is perched atop its sort of noon position, pardon. But it's the same idea that you see of the two pillars. There's one thing to mention about that, and we were talking about it. You were talking about this topsy-turvy world that we now live in, right? Mm-hmm. The clown world, the circus. It is this sort of this idea of the disorientation of death. So of course, not meaning to be morbid, when one dies, it's said that there's a certain, people that have had near-death experiences, there's a disorientation that occurs. You sort of lose connection to this world, right? Mm-hmm. Of course, but you lose connection at that point of death. You lose connection to your mind, to all aspects that establish you as an experience within this world.
I wouldn't say connection, but control. The sense of control. Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. So it's that disorientation within that state. Again, it's a similar thing you see within the mutability of the world today, and it's what happens when any civilization or empire or what have you dies. So you'll notice he carries the banner of the five, right? It's the same idea as the boat. It's this prototypical thing which will always remain, no matter who is in power, who wears the gold cloak, the gold crown, who is part of the priestly or kingly class, who is old or young. You see that for the children of the king. Death is indiscriminate, and death is unyielding, and it cannot be defeated, hence why he's wearing the armour. And atop death, atop the blackness, is the red plume. So it's this fire, that death is an all-consuming force, an all-consuming fire, a bit like Yahweh in that sense. and he is above, he's perched atop this sort of devilish, nightmarish mare that he sits atop, juxtaposed to him, right, wearing the black of the armour, the white and the black, which, again, it's this notion of, the material world of Boaz and Yakin, the maintaining of the cycles through that duality. So he is sort of in a position of authority above both the kingly and priestly. Everyone. And even the priest is beseeching him.
Yes.
This
begging.
Sort of encroaching force of death. And you see it almost as though once death touches you or comes into your moment of time, he's moving from left to right across in a clockwise manner, in a retrograde manner, you could say. He, as soon as he comes into your vicinity, he dies. He cannot be reasoned with, bargained with, and all that will remain, as he shows upon his banner, is the five. Again, a bit like Krishna and the dissolver of worlds.
The five elements.
Time. Yeah, the five elements. That's the only thing that remains. The Padavas. The same notion. Yeah.
And you mentioned the mare, but I'm sorry. Did you ask the horse for its pronouns? Did you just assume?
I know. I assumed its gender. God. Oh, I'll need to go through the self-mortification ritual.
It's what was it called? The barv. The barv. You need to go through.
Yeah, a barv. Yeah. Drop and give me 10. Yeah.
Yeah. So death. When we see the depiction here of the passing of the night of death, we see a particular. Of course, death is in general, but the depicted card shows a particular, the death of a particular way of being, a particular civilization, way of thinking, etc. And that is, I think, again, the death of the same civilization that we saw in Justice. Okay, and it joins, of course, the Hierophant, the Pope there. It joins the king, and it joins the chariot people as well. Everything that is false has to die. And that is, of course, why in religious depictions, sin is associated with death, right? The what was it called? The reward for sin is death.
The wages of sin.
The wages of sin is death, right? Which, of course, sin here being missing the mark, not being true, not being in authentic, organic connection to the essential self. And it has to pass so that the new will approach that essence, will approach that organic being. And again, we are not, at least not me in this sense, talking about literal death per se. Of course, literal death also exists, physical death. But in this depiction, I see it as a metaphorical psychological death, right? The false king died. The false pope will die. The false, citizens will die. Be them, merchants, judges, whatever occupation, artists, they will all die. And they have to die inside of the psyche merely because they were in sin, in the sense of they were missing the mark, right? But again, after the passage of death, we already see between the two towers in the background, the sun is waiting for that passage to end, to shine again, and to renew. And it will renew in temperance. So I really emphasize that point because I think it's really key, from my perspective at least. I'm not saying I own the ultimate truth. But from my perspective, it is really key to understand that that depiction, the depiction that is presented here. And like you well said, of course, the symbol is the inverted pentagram, in a stylized manner, of course, representing the 5 elements upside down, right? And what did we see upside down? The previous card, right? The Hanged Man is upside down, so the 5 elements are upside down. That is, the pentagram is like a man upside down, right? The 2 legs at the top, the 2 arms, and the head at the bottom. So from the Hanged Man always follows death. And it's the death of what is necessary to die. The death of what doesn't hit the mark, of what is already, it's just a facade. It doesn't fulfill its purpose. It needs to go to be renewed.
There's also something to mention regarding that the pentagram. It's a rose, or I believe it's
even the York rose, isn't it?
The York rose, yeah, and then of course you had the
down, but the York rose,
the Lancastrian one was the right way up, the pentacle and the pentagram. Again, that wasn't by accident, of course.
No.
The 2 together, of course, produces the 6. So if you overlay a pentacle and a pentagram, it produces a hexagram. Again, because the upper and the lower axes are sort of shown at that point. That's something else just to mention. But you also see that in the Fool card as well. And the Fool is looking at this rose. He's got the rose, I think it's his right hand.
I'm sorry, let me just correct something there. I've just looked it up because I was in doubt. The White Rose of York points up originally. And it's the Lancaster that points down.
It's the Lancastrian one. Yes.
Right?
So,
but here is inverted because it represents the death. But go on, sorry, it was just to make that correction.
Exactly, yeah. So you could say with the Full Tarot cards, with the White Rose that appears there, I do believe, again, this appears with the character Rose and Leave the World Behind, and I talked about this in my book. Mm-hmm. It's this notion of the sort of the Promethean or Luciferian spirit. Again, it's the instability that is at the heart of the 0 point of the prima causa, right? That it is always almost destined to self-divide, to self-react, to bring itself into involution, right? To thus seek its own conscious evolution. It must understand the good and the bad to thus understand the middle point, if you will. Mm-hmm. It's this idea of triangulation, hence why the generative symbol is the triangle. So I wrote this, that the White Rose in the Fool card, and this has a twofold meaning. The rose is the flower that has 13 petals, typically. The monadic, or it could have 26. It's between that 13 and 26. The monadic and unifying point of the Zohar and the number of the death card in the tarot. Again, the number of the Ophiuchus as well, the center point of the 12 signs of the zodiac. This unknowable, incomprehensible, enigmatic force, or sign or figure, where is Ophiuchus? Is he wrestling with the serpent, or dancing, or bearing it?
Both.
Or both, yeah, exactly. The 13th letter being Mem in Hebrew, hence, of course, Masonry as well, which is associated with the golem. Both death, Met, within Hebrew, think of metropolis, right? We live in metropolises now. You had the 1927 Kabbalistic film Metropolis, talking about the technocratic, Luciferian, Promethean, even Faustian, destruction of the European Magian spirit. The spirit that is, of course, more humanistic in its outlook, more magical and sacred in the way that it views the natural world and views itself within it. And of course, the Faustian idea or drive is more mechanistic in the way it views things. And the cold concrete that exudes death in those urbanized and atomized places. The metropolis is thus, in its hidden sense, the dead city, but it appears as though it's alive. So again, it's an illusion. that is nestled within the dead culture. Hence, this is why we see the clown world, right? The circus is the place where things appear as they are not, right? So, for example, the clown appears as though it is smiling, it is happy, though it's, of course, well, in the modern day, it's associated with horror, right? But a lot of clowns themselves, the most egregious example I can think of is Wayne, what's his name, Gacy? You know, like a serial killer, right? But a lot of clowns may be alcoholics, they may be sad, but again, they put on that happy mask, right?
Well, you saw it in the first Joker. He was trying to be a clown, and his life was misery. So yeah,
exactly. And this is also associated with the fool. So that which we call civilization, or the sterilized form of culture, and truth, emet, and the five petals. So of course, to put to death the golem, to deactivate the golem, you take away the aleph. The aleph is the bull, right? In its pictographic sense, it's also the triangle. Again, it's a symbol of the sun. And the five petals, the nous, logos, phronesis, sophia, dunamis. So those are the 5 stages in the Gnostic tradition of the descent of man from the mind, from the nous. It goes into the logos, the sort of the voice, the word, phronesis, which is intelligence or the intellect, sophia, wisdom, and then dunamis, which is action, which is the literal crafting of the world, the material manifestation of it. Surrounding her to protect from the thorns, that is to reach the beauty of the rose, that which encapsulates the bittersweet paradox of both life begetting death, and vice versa. One has to avoid the myriad of thorns that protrude from its sides. And this is the idea of the garland of roses that you see with the World Tarot card. Another thing to mention with Judy Garland, with the Wizard of Oz. So, again, we won't get into that, but that's another set of symbolism that is exactly sort of intimating what we're stating here. So Toto is Sirius as the dog. I believe Toto itself is from Sumerian or Akkadian, and it's the same idea as Sirius. It's a name for Sirius.
It's the 1010, right? Toto.
The 1010, exactly. Yeah. So
and
it's
Judy Garland, Dorothy, which means gift from the gods, isn't it? I think.
Yes.
Wanted to go somewhere over the rainbow. So that is significant as well. I mean, there's a lot of symbology in that story.
Yeah, transcending beyond the triangle or the triangulation, the prism that divided the white light. So she wants to understand.
And you also mentioned before, and quite correctly, that the rainbow is a symbol of death. So she wanted to go beyond death, right? A symbol of destruction, yeah.
Yeah, the Zohar actually states that. They state, when you see the rainbow, it is the sign of the tikkun. So that is when the wicked will be basically exterminated from the world. It uses a different term, but it's essentially exterminated, eradicated from the world. Another thing to mention.
Do you think that is connected to pride in any way?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's connected. Remember.
Because that's where we see the rainbow nowadays.
Well, we also saw it during the event of 2020.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
With the medical establishment.
Absolutely.
We saw it here constantly. Everyone had in their windows little rainbows.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And it's a sign of the covenant too, with Yahweh. So, I mean, none of this is by accident. And people don't really, well, I say people, a lot of people are beginning to wake up, but during the event of 2020, people were just putting the rainbow up, not even thinking about it. There was no real thought put into it. Why a rainbow? Why use the rainbow? Of course, a lot of people just thought, well, it's part of the sort of woke neoliberal culture we live in. It's the symbol of it. So, but why is it the symbol of it? You know? Another thing to mention with Toto, you mentioned the 10 and the 10. Well, you have tenet, which is 10, and then from the other side, from reading from right to left, is 10. So that's the centre of the Satyr square, both the horizontal centre and the vertical, which produces the 10, 10, 10, 10 cross, like what we were mentioning with the Hanged Man. It is 1/4 of the 4 major royal stars of Persia, which are ultimately the 4 major start and end points of the world ages. So again, this idea of the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning is the end, because Taurus was the end of, Aquarius will be the beginning of the new world age, but it's also the end of the age of the world age of Taurus, and then so on and so forth, right? So the Aquarius will be the end of the world age of it will be not Aquarius, Scorpio will be the end of the world age of Aquarius, but will be the beginning of the world age of Scorpio of itself, right? So it's this same idea. This is tied in with the 4 and the 3, which itself is tied in with, for example, the Masonic sigil. So the square, which is utilised to measure the 4, right? Measure the 4-sided, or the 4-sided box with the 6 faces. So that's a symbol of the world, and then you have, of course, the 3, which is a symbol of the compass that is utilised to measure that of the circle, the heavenly figure. So again, this is why the 4 and the 3 are connected with the rebus in alchemy, or the divine hermaphrodite.
Before it gets too buried in other things, before you were mentioning about how there was an older version, let's say, of the world of culture that was more in line with nature and so on, and then it was replaced by a concrete world of death. It must be stated, and at least I wanted to emphasize, that the fact that it was closer in resemblance to an organic living does not mean it was organic. So it had to go anyway. The thing is, does it go organically, or is it steered to go in order to, maintain control of the scripted cycle instead of going through the organic cycle? So what I wanted to emphasize was that even that world that had a semblance of being more organic was still false. And that is what is symbolized by justice, right? Justice seems to be more elevated than the emperor, right? But it's actually even perhaps deeper in falsehood than the emperor, because the Martian existence at least was very direct, right? You knew what was there. I mean, if one was aggressive towards another, you knew he's aggressive. He wants to take over my lands. He wants to take over whatever, and I have to fight for it. So it was, in that sense, with less masks, right? Still false, but with less masks. In the world of justice, everything is covered like, those linguistics. What's it called? There's a name for it. Covered by euphemisms, right? Of instead of saying, no, I want to take over your lands, you say something like, the taxation implies that, the real estate is carried over to the state, something like that, So that too has to go. That too had to go at the time that it was there, and it was replaced by a world of death, and a world that is, much less visibly organic, which will also pass. So I just wanted to make that point before it went, it became too buried after what you've said.
Well, turning back to that, it's this idea of sin that you mentioned, and it's this missing of the mark, amartia, in Greek. And even that idea of missing the mark, right? Again, it's almost like a bullseye, the concentric rings of the bullseye. And it's this idea that we have to, again, like the Hanged Man, we have to go through cyclical reincarnative cycles, or a reincarnative process, rather, a cyclical reincarnative process, to thus reach, to reach these wheels within wheels, to reach the truth that's buried beneath the layers of lies, right? Mm-hmm. Peel back these veils that conceal and sequester the truth. Again, it's that same idea. You've missed the mark. You've not quite hit that bullseye center. And again, this is sort of subtly pointing to the very nature of what is driving us, right? Mm-hmm. So I was watching this video today, and it was about this single-celled amoeba, and he puts it through a time lapse, and he puts it into this labyrinth, this maze, and the amoeba itself it's based around the nucleus, right, the mitochondria, and so it should have no sentience according to science because it has no cells, right? But right away, it almost picked the correct pathway to the various oat flakes, its sustenance that were contained at the beginning, middle, and end of the maze. It knew exactly where to go. There was no guessing, nothing. It's almost like it knew, it could see through the maze itself. So again, it begs this question. Perhaps the intellect itself, the mind, perhaps it is something, rather than empowering us, it actually perhaps limits us, right? And this is what we see with the Gnostic theogony, the Gnostic cosmogony, and how the descent of man from his spiritual abode has come into being. So the amoeba itself almost takes on this greater mercurial property, meaning it's more in line with Mercurius. It is that which is in motion, and it can almost understand the basic, the rudimentary shackles of the physical world. Mm-hmm. It understands and sees through the labyrinth itself. That it has an intellect or a sentience that transcends the intellect, rather. So
yes, absolutely. I would say that instead of putting things like, the mind is hampering, because I think, and this is again my view on things, it doesn't mean that it's the truth, but I see that the mind has a place in the function. It is more about which authority do you follow? Because if the mind becomes the authority, and when we're talking mind, we're talking lower level mind, we're talking AI level, we're talking mental personality. If the mental personality becomes the authority, it's not equipped, it's not built to be an authority. It's not built to, direct. It is built to follow, right? And so the authority should be the ego. And in that sense, the amoeba, and of course, we're talking metaphorically here. I don't know exactly what goes on inside of an amoeba. But the amoeba, in that sense, follows the ego directly without needing, because the amoeba probably doesn't need a mind. It self-directs. It goes directly manifested. What happens with humanity is that humanity has a mind for a reason. It has a mind to, be more complex, to build more complex things, to discover more complex things, to analyze more complex things. But the mind must be a servant, not be placed in a position of authority. And what we see with rationalism, with rationalism, with the idea that, everything can and should be viewed only by the analytical means, right? so only by the mind, is placing the mind in a place of authority that it was not created to be in, right? And this, what this generates is insufficiency, and therefore generates dependency upon an external ego figure, which can be experts, the heroes, let's say, experts, priests, gurus, whatever it is. It will always be externalized. But that authority should and is built to be internal. But it becomes dormant. It becomes dormant due to the influence, the negative influence, the negative false memories that were implanted in order to kill off that connection, which is never killed, but cut off that connection as much as possible to make that authority of the ego dormant. And this is again why, I go back a little bit, this is again why I think in the Christian gospel Christ is depicted as being crucified. This is a steering of the story, because the correct ending for the gospel would be not his crucifixion, to save the mental characters from their sin, which means you can continue being what you are, right? This is what it means. You don't have to face death. You skip death, right? No, you don't, right? So the ending, the proper ending, should have been the coronation of Christ, the coronation of the ego being placed in a position of authority, so that it regulates from there the mind characters, the apostles. So the mind characters become servants, let's say, subjects of the king that is the ego. The ego is born to be the king. The ego is created to be the king. So in that sense, the amoeba, in a metaphorical way, is following the ego, is following therefore its own essence, and therefore it can see through the maze. If that is an actual experiment, I mean, we're talking about a possibility here, and taking that video as being genuine, right? But if it is genuine, that's the way I see it. But I would just emphasize that the mind has a place in humanity and other animals. Mind, when an animal or being is born with the mind, it has a healthy place and a healthy function to operate in. But it needs to follow its authority. And usually in man, that is where the problem lies, where the authority is seen.
Absolutely, yeah. I think as well, it's almost man is, with the intellect, man sort of straddles the mean line or the center, and he can do so. So, for example, even what we are doing right now, we are almost critiquing the very fabric of reality, right? Through these cards. I mean, these cards are sort of archetypal, and
we need the mind. And we need the mind to do that.
We need the mind to do so. But within that, the source of greater mysteries, though we may feel like we're making progress, it will all, again, the journey is the destination, because we can never reach the destination itself.
Not with the mind solely, exactly.
Not with the mind solely,
but with the authority. We need to awaken that authority, and that we see in the strength card. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just so that I don't lose the point. And that is awakened in the strength card, right? Way back. And we awaken that authority, and that authority is the one then supposedly saying, I am the ruler, I dictate, follow me. What does the mind do? It gets distracted and refuses to follow until death comes. Because death is inevitable if you refuse, right? And when it is said in religious terms that you are saved, you no longer have death. What it means is that you, being connected to the ego and being connected to the essence, the mental personality no longer dies. Because it's following the correct authority that was assigned to that individual. So that is, just a distinction to make there. So as you've said, what we're doing here requires the mind. We need the mind because that is what humans are supposed to do. Humans are supposed to look at reality and figure out who they are, right? And to do that, we need mind. And other beings need minds as well. There is a healthy place for the mind. But the problem lies on where we attribute authority. And if we disconnect our internal authority, we will always be subject to someone else's.
Yeah.
Anyway, man, I don't know if you have, we're already 2 hours in. I don't know if you have any final thoughts on the
just
death card?
really quickly.
No problem.
You have so the death is associated with the Dis or Pluto, which of course means wealthy or wealth giver, or Dis Pater, the father of wealth. So it's this idea that the death is also a renewing aspect. It brings the wealth of understanding. It's ruled by Pluto. It's the Hades. He has his jackals of Cerberus, the multi-headed dog, which has, I believe, 3 heads. Again, past, present, and future, similar to Hecate. It was traditionally ruled by Mars, hence the red eyes of the fiery red eyes of the horse.
Yeah, and that Cerberus, just a quick note, is also depicted in Scrooge with the ghost of the Christmas past, present, and future.
Yes, absolutely. So essentially, the whole thing is symbolic of individuation.
Right.
The bringing about of the self-realization, again, which sort of begets death. It produces death in a figurative sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. Silas, it was, again, a pleasure. I hope the listeners, it was a pleasure for the listeners as well. I think we've covered, these 2 very important cards and very recognizable cards in depth and with, good insights, in my opinion. Did you enjoy it, Silas?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always love these deep dives. They're great.
Excellent. And so this was episode 6, everyone. I hope to see you here again for episode 7. Thank you.